We're getting a new look inside President Trump's legal strategy against the Russia investigation. In a confidential 20-page letter obtained by the New York Times, President Trump's lawyers argue that the president cannot be compelled to testify in the Russia probe, and they say he has full authority over all federal investigations. The letter was submitted to the special counsel's team by the president's lawyers in January. It asserts in striking language that the president has sweeping powers, saying that by virtue of his office, the president, quote, could neither constitutionally nor legally constitute obstruction because that would amount to him obstructing himself, and that he could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired. Now, in an interview this morning, the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said that the president probably does have the power to pardon himself, but has no intention of doing it. The letter also confirms for the first time that President Trump dictated the misleading statement about the meeting Donald Trump Jr. held in Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer in June of 2016. That admission directly contradicts numerous statements from the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders. They both said the president was not involved. I want to go straight to Preet Bharara, the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, who was fired by President Trump last year. He also prosecuted Dinesh D'Souza, whom the president pardoned this week. Thanks for joining me this morning,
Sure.
Preet. I want to start with the news that the president actually did dictate the statement on the Trump Tower meeting. Does this put the president or anyone around him in legal jeopardy?
No, it may. We sit here on television from time to time and pick up on little bits of information and the fact of a particular meeting or a particular statement or a particular report. And I don't think any one of those things makes a clear-cut case on obstruction or on some crime related to collusion. But taken in aggregate and in combination, I think it ends up making a difference. I think the important thing, as you pointed out at the top of the show, is that you have the lawyer to the President of the United States, Jay Sekulow, and on separate occasions you've had Rudy Giuliani do this, basically lie to the American people repeatedly. And I don't quite understand it. Jay Sekulow said time and time again, directly into the faces of the American people on television, Sarah Sanders did the same thing and said, in no uncertain terms, if you go back and you look at the statements, there's no wiggle room here. They said the president had nothing to do with that statement by Donald Trump Jr. and didn't draft it, didn't sign off on it, and it turns out that's completely untrue. And if you're going to take the position, like they do in the sweeping letter about executive authority, that the president is in a special position in various ways, then I think the lawyers to the president have a special responsibility not to come on television and lie.
Well, let's talk about the sweeping power, they argue. It does lay out that the president's power over the Department of Justice, quote, put simply, the Constitution leaves no question that the president has exclusive authority over the ultimate conduct and disposition of all criminal investigations and over those executive branch officials responsible for conducting those investigations. So the president's lawyers are arguing, that he can do whatever he wants with these investigations. Do you see the law that way?
Yeah, I think most people think that obviously the president is in a special position. That letter, which I've read, and it's a long letter and it misses a lot of points, but it says in lip service at one point the president is not above the law, but most of the rest of the letter suggests that he is. Now, the interesting thing about it is usually in communications with opposing counsel, defense lawyers will take extreme positions because that's their sort of bargaining spot in connection with the back and forth adversarial process. So it's not crazy and it's not unique that these folks are taking a very, very, very sort of broad position. Defense lawyers do that all the time. The difference here is they're taking this position on behalf of the President of the United States, and all the public statements and public actions by the president in connection both with pardons and assertions of his own power when he himself goes on television and talks to the American people seem to jibe with that view. I mean, one of the things that I think legal experts have been talking about for the last 20 hours is that the letter spends a long time talking about a particular statute, not to get in the weeds, but a particular obstruction statute, Section 1505, and they don't discuss at all in that letter the more relevant and more recent statute, 1512. So there's a lot of problems with the legal argument, technically and also given its expansiveness.
Right. They cite the wrong statute, but let's focus on the big picture, as you mentioned. Just generally, they say in this letter that the president, a president, cannot obstruct justice because he is the president. Is that right? Is that a common view in legal thinking and legal, sort of among legal experts?
Yeah, well, here's the problem. It doesn't come up that often.
True.
It comes up almost never. And so one of the central questions related to your question of whether or not the president can be subpoenaed for testimony is basically untested. The last time that happened and came to the fore was in 1998. And as everyone knows, the independent counsel at the time, Kenneth Starr, said that President Clinton at the time, had to come in and testify in response to a subpoena. They had a legal wrangling about that, as often happens with these kinds of things when there's an assertion of executive power and expansive executive authority. And they negotiated something, and the president at the time came in voluntarily. Something like that could happen here. I mean, Rudolph Giuliani himself said, again, directly into the television cameras in 1998, when it was helpful to him, given his political view, that a president absolutely must comply with a subpoena to testify. I think the view is overly expansive and overly broad. But I think the other thing that this indicates is this is not ultimately going to be decided by Bob Mueller. It'll be a court or it'll be Congress.
Let's just, one other thing on this letter. You talked about Rudy Giuliani. He also just said moments ago that he agrees that the president probably does have the power to pardon himself, though he added that he doesn't think the president will do that. What's your take?
I think it would be outrageous for a sitting president of the United States to pardon. I think if the president decided that he was going to pardon himself, I think that's almost self-executing impeachment. Whether or not there's a minor legal argument that some law professor somewhere in a legal journal can make that the president can pardon, that's not what the framers could have intended. That's not what the American people, I think, would be able to stand for. The second thing is when Rudy Giuliani says, and I hate to keep harping on this point, Rudy, just like Jay Sekulow, keeps coming up with things that end up being false. So when he says the president is not contemplating something, I have no faith in that whatsoever.
Let's turn, Preet, to the pardon that the president exercised this week. Another controversial case. He pardoned conservative filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza after his guilty plea for an illegal campaign contribution in 2014. You were the prosecutor on that case. Now, the president says he pardoned D'Souza because he was treated, quote, very unfairly. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was the U.S. attorney at the time. There are career prosecutors, career agents who brought this garden variety case in connection with using straw donors illegally to contribute to a political campaign. It's not the crime of the century. We had about 1,000 more important cases that we prosecuted at the time. But Dinesh D'Souza was intentionally committed a crime, which is proven beyond all doubt. He admitted his guilt in a guilty plea before the court. He said he regretted the action. His lawyer, by the way, who's no slouch, Ben Brathman, who has a lot on his plate these days, and is about as aggressive a lawyer as there is, literally said in court, "We have no defense, Your Honor." So, the questions about whether or not he was treated unfairly was litigated in the court. The judge, very well respected, Judge Berman, listened to the arguments about that, said it was all hat, no cattle. There was no evidence of that whatsoever. It's the kind of, look, we prosecuted more people for that precise crime who were Democrats than Republicans. Most people have never heard of Dinesh D'Souza, even though he's making a lot of noise now. He seems to think that the world revolves around him.
Well, let's talk about the noise that he's making, because a lot of that noise is aimed personally at you. I just want to read one of his tweets about you. He said, "Karma is a bitch department. At Preet Bharara wanted to destroy a fellow Indian American to advance his career. Then he got fired and I got pardoned." Your response?
It's charming, isn't it? Look, I don't have any other response other than to say he was prosecuted fairly. Nobody takes into account someone's ethnicity or background or even political viewpoint. Like I said, we prosecuted people based on the facts and the law. There was overwhelming evidence such that his lawyer had no legal defense to bring, and he can whine and gloat simultaneously if he wants. The fact remains is we had a lot of important cases in the office. Career people did their job, and that's what they're supposed to do.
Let's talk more broadly about the idea of pardoning. Look, this isn't the first time that President Trump pardoned one of his political allies. We can put that on the backdrop of the fact that several campaign officials, as you know, are either being prosecuted and investigated. One has pled guilty. How do you read the tea leaves here? Do you think that the president is trying to send them a message?
I don't know if he's trying to send them a message, but they're clearly getting a message. One of his former associates, Roger Stone, has said that he's gotten the message loud and clear. Part of the problem here is with respect to Dinesh D'Souza or anyone else, is there's a process you're supposed to follow. And it is true that the president has a broad grant of authority, especially in the pardon arena. But generally speaking, so people understand that power is being exercised fairly and equitably and on the merits, and not because of whim or spite or partisan advantage, you go through the pardon attorney and you get the opinions of the people who engage in the prosecution, and you talk to the judge, and there's a deliberation, and then the president can choose to disregard it by now, pardoning a number of people who are his political allies and whose pardons will please some segment of his base, like D'Souza and like some of the others, Scooter Libby and Sheriff Joe Arpaio. I think he's making it very clear, whether he's sending a message or not, he's making it very clear that he's prepared to pardon anyone for any reason without any review. It was suggested that he reviewed the case. I don't think Donald Trump did anything of the sort. He decides in the moment to take a political action, and that's what he did in this case. And I think he's going to keep doing it.
And one last question. Aside from the signal he might be sending, the pardons that he's making just happen to be cases prosecuted by people like you, not his best friend, and others who he is sort of at political odds with. Do you think he's intentionally undoing cases that people like you tried successfully?
Obviously you're referring to the suggestion he made that he might pardon Martha Stewart, who's prosecuted by Jim Comey.
Yes.
And Rod Blagojevich. You're supposed to pardon people because they're worthy of being pardoned, not because you're trying to please anyone in your political base, or you're trying to spite anyone who you might think is your political adversary. And I think it's a sad commentary on the power, which, by the way, can be taken away by the American people in the future. And if you abuse the pardon power in a particular way, there comes a point where Congress can take action as well. And maybe he's doing it for that reason. He does a lot of things on whim and for spite. I hope that's not the case, but it's looking more and more like that's so.
Preet Bharara, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Appreciate it.